So we have already covered up to, I think, week 6, right? Yeah, week 5, sorry, week 0 to week 5. So we'll start on from week 6 today. Once I start, I will not see the chats. So if you have a doubt, please unmute and ask. Okay. So I think, let me just read the 603. Okay. Okay, so let's start, guys. So week 6 onwards, we actually went to pointers. So some very basics of what we knew before that, that whenever you actually declare a variable, some space is allocated inside the memory, and that name of the variable is used to actually access it. Now this is also for array. For array, basically, you also need an index along with the name of the variable, and you can use the syntax like ARR0, ARR1 to go there. Now in C and C++, you also have one more way to access the same location. You can use a pointer variable, which can actually point to the address of another variable. So basically, a pointer variable just like some other variable. You have to declare it. You have to have a type associated with it, but you use this asterisk, in front of that particular variable, and this type actually means that what is the actual type of variable to which this pointer can point to. And in order to assign a particular value, this value of course has to be an address and not really a typical value. You use the ampersand operator, and the syntax is something like this: p is equal to and ampersand I. This is a schematic. Basically, let us say you have this I. The address of I is actually 1001, and P actually stores 1001. This is the idea. And uh, just a minute. I think I have to. Okay. Quit. Sorry. Slideshow. So the asterisk operator can so these asterisk and ampersand operators, they are basically kind of the inverse of each other. Asterisk operator will allow you to get the value at a particular address, whereas ampersand operator allows you to get the address of a particular variable. um, and you can also have pointers to pointer variables. So basically, the redirection can be any number of times. It could be, for instance, asterisk q, which means that q is basically going to point to a pointer to integer type of variable. So something like this, that now q can store the address of p, something like this. And so in order to manipulate pointer variables, there is some operations that are allowed. You can, for example, add some values to a pointer, or subtract some values from the pointer. You cannot multiply pointers, by the way, But whenever you add something to a pointer, it's essentially uh, it is essentially meaning that you are adding that much number of bytes to the pointer. The number of bytes basically is decided by the type of the pointer. So if the type to which the pointer is pointing is integer, whenever you add one, you basically add 4 bytes to it, considering that that integer is of 4 byte size. And if it is of type double, you basically add 8 to it. If it is actually of a type of a particular structure variable, then you actually add the amount of bytes that this particular structure occupies into memory. So whenever you add or subtract something from a pointer, the actual number that gets added to the address depends on its type. So usually on 32, I mean, usually basically this is something you have to come. In fact, today itself I got a query where I realized that a person was using a 64-bit system, but the pointers were basically 4 bytes, and that's because it is dependent on the platform. The GCC version that the student was using was actually a 32-bit version. But in general, you will have 64-bit systems having 8 bytes of pointer variables, and 32-bit systems having 4 bytes. You can use the size of, size of is a common operator that you guys already know. You can use the size of operator to check all these things. I think we have covered this. Incrementing, yeah, this we have covered. This was essentially the idea where we were trying to. Now this is the dangerous part of using a pointer. You can always go and walk into a memory location that is not really legal for you to access. So whenever you do any kind of pointer arithmetic, addition, subtraction, you have to be very sure that the address that gets stored inside the pointer is a valid address. Otherwise, there is a chance that you might see a segmentation fault. This is, I think, what we were trying to do with segmentation faults. Any questions here? Let me check the chats again. Okay. So then, what is the next part? Yeah, pointers and arrays. So usually these pointers and arrays, they actually have a very close relationship with each other. Many a times we talk about the arrays and pointers together. In fact, one of the chapters in your reference book is, I think, titled Pointers and Arrays. And the reason for this is that arrays are essentially a kind of pointer constants. Okay, so they are why they are constants, because they cannot actually be changed, right? So if ARR, for instance, is an array, you cannot modify this particular pointer to point to any other location. So things like ARR plus plus or ARR equal to ARR plus 2, this is illegal. You cannot do that. Okay, so it is a pointer, but it is a constant. You cannot change it once it gets created. And whenever you actually type ARRI, this particular expression, when it is being evaluated by your compiler, the equivalent expression is something like this. Okay, so basically it is ARR and plus I. So keep this in mind, that ARR plus I is not the same as ARR equal to ARR plus I, right? So basically you are just taking a constant and adding another number to it, and whatever is that number, that address, okay, that is what you are doing with asterisk, right? So basically by this you are going to fetch the particular value that is there on ARRI. And we saw in the previous revision lecture that essentially this ARRI is because the memory is contiguously allocated. We can always do something like this, that if ARR 0 is 1000, ARR 1 is 1004, ARR 2 is 1008, so on and so forth. So this is why this so-called pointer arithmetic actually works well, because whenever you add 1 to this ARR, it actually gets ahead by the type of ARR. So if ARR is an integer, it will go ahead by 4 bytes. If it is of type double, it will get ahead by 8 bytes, so on and so forth. Okay, and wherever you see ARR is just basically an alias for ampersand ARR 0, so address at ARR 0, right? So this is another shortcut that you need to understand. Now, one of the things that is often very confusing, but it's actually a very straightforward concept, is the equivalence of pointers and arrays. This is even more difficult or confusing sometimes when we are talking about character arrays or pointers to characters. In most cases, a character array and a pointer to a character can actually be used interchangeably. So these pointer to pointer to characters, you can pass them to all these the string functions like strcmp, strlen, strcpy, all those functions, right? You can pass a character pointer to it, or you can also pass a character array to it. And the reason you can understand that basically they are essentially the same thing. A character array is a kind of character pointer. It's just that you cannot do hello plus plus or something like that. So this is the equivalence, right? You can actually assign a value to a character array, and then you can point to a pointer. Here you can see that I'm doing hptr plus plus and not hello plus plus, right? If I try to do hello plus plus, this will give me an error, because hello cannot be changed. Hello has to point to the same address all the time. But I can take another character pointer that points to the, for the start of that memory block of the array, and then I can do something like hptr plus plus. This is perfectly legal. Okay. Now, another aspect because of which pointers are actually useful is for dynamic memory allocation. We saw that at least in the early days, right, when you had compilers which could not which could not allocate you memory if the size of the array was supplied through a variable. So in those cases, this was the only way to actually allocate dynamically sized arrays. I think today the modern compilers allow you to use a variable, but nevertheless, we will see how useful this is when when we see the linked list examples. But the idea is something like this. If you want to allocate memory dynamically, there is a function called malloc. Malloc function can allocate arbitrary amount of memory to you in the beginning, in the middle of a program, right? So basically, as and when you require some memory, you can use malloc. The only argument that you pass to malloc is the number of bytes, okay? And then the memory that gets returned, you can do a kind of typecasting, explicit typecasting of that memory, and you can get the actual value. And this is the example. uh,
Sir, can you please once explain the malloc function again?
yeah, so basically the idea of malloc function is this. uh, the now I mean, some of you uh, might have been to the lecture by Avnish, but the idea is something like this. When you declare a typical array, especially inside any function as a local variable, the memory gets allocated inside the stack, and as soon as the function is over, that memory is freed. Now there is another space within your program space, where which we call as heap, okay? And this is basically some amount of memory that can be used on the run. So basically, the idea of a malloc function is that it gives you some memory from that heap storage, okay? And then this memory can be used by you in any way, right? The only thing it returns you is contiguously allocated block of memory, right? And you pass a single argument to malloc. You basically say n means that please allocate n bytes of memory for me. From there onwards, it's up to you how you use this memory. You can use it as, let us say if you've got 20 bytes allocated through malloc by passing 20 as its parameter. Now you can either use it as a character array of size 20, or an integer array of size 5, okay? Or some structure that has, let us say, 10 characters and one double, one short, something like this, basically, right? It's up to you how you use that 20 bytes of memory. Malloc doesn't care, okay? It will simply give you that much amount of memory allocated from another space, another memory space, that is not dependent on your stack. So basically, this memory space is not deallocated if the current function where malloc was called, when this current function returns, this memory is still allocated to you, and you have to explicitly free it, okay, whenever you are done. Okay, so this is the overall idea of malloc function. Any other queries?
No, sir.
Okay. So free part is necessary because um, if you actually keep on allocating memory through malloc, the memory that is there in heap is basically limited. So after some time, you might not have any memory left. Okay, and such a situation is also known as memory leak. So it is a good idea that whenever whenever the memory that you are using currently, its purpose is over, you explicitly call the free function and free that memory. So this is one of the uh, what can I say, one of the exceptions. Okay, so usually what we thought, we said that most of the expressions are evaluated from left to right, but there are some conditions where this left to right thing is not followed, right? And this is that particular case, right? So this uh, asterisk and ampersand operators are right to left associative. Okay, and let me just also give you a brief idea of associativity and precedence. So precedence, right, it is mentioned in terms of classes. Okay, so there are multiple classes of precedence. Okay, the highest precedence operators are evaluated first by your compiler, and the lowest precedence operators are evaluated in the last. Associativity comes into picture only when you have two operators which are which belong to the same class. Okay, the same precedence class. In that case, the associativity decides which of the two has to be evaluated first. So for most operators, this associativity is left to right. For most precedence classes, this associativity is left to right. For some precedence classes, this is being an exception. The associativity is right to left. So uh, if you have two operators with right to left associativity within the same expression, the right one is evaluated first as compared to the left one. So a classic case where you have to be a bit careful is when you are using these plus plus operators, the pre-increment and the post-increment operator. So one of the difference between pre-increment and post-increment operator is that pre-increment operator has right to left associativity. So now you can see in this particular expression, asterisk as well as plus plus, they both have the right to left associativity. So asterisk PTR is in fact, have a look at this. So if you write something like this, you might feel that it will be evaluated in this order, but it is not. So asterisk PTR is evaluated first and then plus plus. So this is a typical case. Usually my suggestion is that whenever you are using plus plus operator and asterisk operator in the same expression, try to use parenthesis so that you do not get confused. Okay, if you use parenthesis, you don't need to know about it. In this case, when you are using the post increment operator, this post increment operator actually has higher precedence. Okay, because it has higher precedence, so then as I said, right, precedence classes are there. If there are two operators from two different precedence classes, associativity doesn't it doesn't come into picture. It only comes into picture when you have two operators from the same precedence class, and because plus the pre-increment and asterisk, they actually belong to the same class, which is actually below the post increment operator. So this is why you have to be a bit careful with this. As I said, don't be too much worried about it. These are some of the exceptions, and sometimes you might actually the reason you should know this is sometimes you might receive weird results if you are not careful. So this is just a digression. Any questions? Okay. So then we went to functions. Now we have actually used a lot of functions throughout the course. In fact, from the first lecture itself, we started using things like printf and scanf. But these functions are all library functions. They are basically written by someone else, and we were simply using it. You can also write your own functions. This was the idea. In fact, C is usually known to be a language which is basically famous for allowing users to write so many functions. a modular language. It's a procedural language. Um, so similar to a variable, a function can have declaration as well as definition. We did not talk about declaration and definition in detail for variables, because whenever you are doing it for a local variable, the definition and declaration is actually the same. Unless you are creating a global variable, declaration and definition, they are not different. So a particular function's declaration is it you usually supply these things. It is not necessary that you supply all this. I mean, the only thing that is necessary is name. But if you provide all these things, it's generally a good idea. Okay, and such a declaration is also called as a prototype, by the way. So this is a typical example of a prototype. I provide the return type, I provide the name of the function, and I provide the type of the parameters that it is going to take. And by the way, yeah, so keep in mind that if you put a semicolon here, it is a declaration. If you put parenthesis here, then it is a definition. So when you define a function, you first have the function header, which is basically very similar to the function's prototype. You have to put the return type, the name, the arguments, and of course you also have to give the name of each argument now, because they'll be treated like local variables for that function. And then with the help of a pair of parentheses, you create a code block, and whatever you write here is part of your function's definition. This is a simple function, up to uppercase. The return type is char asterisk, and it takes up two parameters, char asterisk word and int number of characters. Now you would be knowing that when you do asterisk, what happens. We'll have a look at it, but basically this is a typical example of a function. And yeah, and this is the declaration for the same function. Here, everything is basically optional other than the name of the function. So in theory, I could have simply written to underscore uppercase underscore word and then just the parenthesis, and that too is a legal declaration. This particular declaration is also known as a prototype. Usually in prototype, I don't put the name, and by the way, the name gets ignored anyhow. Okay, so the name of the variable is not necessary; it will be ignored, but I can give. So it is a good practice actually to do this. And this is how you call the function: the name of the function, parenthesis, the parameters, and semicolon. So whenever you pass some arguments from the calling function to the called function, there are two terms that I use: formal parameters and actual parameters. Actual parameters are the base are the sorry. So actual parameters are the actual values that you pass to the function, and formal parameters are basically the variables which you use to catch them in the function. And okay, so this is here. You can see that the actual parameters are, where is it being called here now? So word and character counts are the actual parameters, and word and number of characters are the formal parameters. By the way, main is also a special type of a function which from where your program's execution starts. You might now know that it is not really the case. It starts with underscore start, but yeah, for us it is basically starting from the main function. Any questions? We have some water. Okay, so let's go ahead. Okay, so now the next thing that we looked at was this global and static scopes. Now we have discussed the concept of scope multiple times throughout the course. The idea of a scope is usually wherever you create a particular variable, it is accessible within that same block. I mean, this is the most coarse explanation of what a particular scope is. But usually when we talk about that, we actually talk about the auto storage class. This is the storage class in which most of the variables that we put in our programs are essentially auto variables. They are local variables to a particular function. Um, uh, whenever we want to pass a particular value from one function to another function, we have to supply them as an argument, because their scope is limited to the calling function only. The called function needs a copy of the values of the calling functions variables, and this is why we have to pass them. Similarly, whenever you return a value from a function, it has to be caught in the calling function, assigned to some other variable, for example, because the scope of the value will change. um, okay, we create two string related functions, and yeah, so this is just an idea of to give you about how these scopes work. So str scope is within the main function only. This is the idea. Okay, and so this is the idea of passing your strings to some other functions. Now you can see that I'm going to pass my string to this particular function. It is going to do some operations over it. Global variables are essentially the variables which are declared outside all the functions. Their scope, therefore, is basically program. Throughout the whole program, any function can access your global variables. So another term for using global variables is extern variables, and there is also a keyword called extern. The extern keyword, if you want to see how it actually works, in the last week, I think week 11, I have shared a code example for showroom. If you would like to see how extern keyword is actually used, you can read through that example. But the idea is extern keyword is only useful when your code is split across multiple files. As long as your code is within the same file, you don't need the extern keyword. So here now, I have created this str, which was earlier within the scope of main only. If you declare it outside main, its scope now becomes accessible throughout the program. These trim and starts with function, you don't need to pass str to them in order to operate over them. They can simply access str as if it's like a local variable. Okay, this is the idea. Now, similarly, there is another storage class called the static storage class. Now, static storage actually, let me also tell you that static and global variables are stored in a separate location. Okay, so there is a separate place where global and static variables are stored. They are not stored within the stack. Okay, so this memory is at a different location, and this is why this memory is unaffected by your programs, by your program having different function calls. So this is at a different location altogether. With static, it is in some ways similar to a global function, that it doesn't matter what function calls are going on, the values persist. It's just that with a static storage class, this particular variable is essentially a local variable for a particular function, but it's not freed. Okay, the memory allocated to it is not freed. It persists across multiple invocations of the same function. So in some cases, you can use this to your advantage. Okay, so a typical example could be, let us say you want to keep track of how many times a particular function was called. So you create a static variable and you keep on incrementing it, and this means that you can now have the total number of times this function has been called. uh, so disadvantage, of course, is this is a you sometimes you can use static variables to get away from a disadvantage of global variables, because global variables are accessible to all the functions. If you want to have a particular global variable accessible to just one function, then this is essentially a static variable. Stop clock, I think we have discussed it in the class itself, so let's move forward. um Also, so this is again, oh no, this amalgamation of external and static only comes into picture when you are actually going to split your code across multiple files. The idea is something like this: if you want a particular global variable to be accessible to just the functions defined in the same code file. Okay, because when your code is split across multiple code files, a global variable is basically applicable, is accessible to all the files. Okay, I have all the files in which your code has been defined. If you want to restrict it to just one file, the file in which it has been defined, you can also call it, you can make it static. So basically that is the, that it's a very peculiar case where you would like to have a global variable declared as static. And again, in the showroom example, it is there. You can go and check how static and global, they can actually mix, you can mix them together. In the showroom example, it is there. Any questions on this? Okay. So after that, we had a look at recursion. Recursion is basically the case where you are trying to call the same function again and again from within the same function. That is the idea of recursion. Okay, and recursion is usually a counterpart to loops. Okay, so what do you do in loops? You basically execute the same code multiple times, and then you exit out of the loop when a particular condition is true. Similarly, you can do the same task using recursion. That is the overall idea. If a function calls itself, okay, that is called as direct recursion. This is the example. I'm making a call to f from f. And if the function, like there are two functions which call each other like this, it is an indirect recursion with two functions. You can actually have a chain of more than two as well. The idea is at some point of time, if you start from f, you should go back to f. If this is happening, then we call it recursion. Now, you know the concept of principle of mathematical induction, or PMI. So essentially, you use PMI something like this, that if you want to prove something for natural numbers, you start by saying, you first show that it is actually true for p0, then you assume that it is true for k, and then you just prove that it is true for pk plus 1, and then you essentially have proven that the formula is applicable to all the natural numbers. So the whole the same concept of PMI can actually be generalized and called as divide and conquer. The idea of divide and conquer is to find out a particular pattern, okay, in which you can break down a larger problem in terms of smaller and simpler problems, and then you can construct the solution to the larger problem in a bottom up fashion. So this is the example of factorial. I think you understand how it works. So basically, we say that the factorial of n can be defined as factorial of n minus 1 into n. Okay, so this is the recursive formulation. This is what it's meant here. And you say that when n becomes small, right? So when n becomes 0 or 1, the answer is straight away 1. So this is how you define a problem in terms of divide and conquer, that you at each step you reduce the size of the problem, and then there is some kind of a base case. So as soon, when your problem becomes extremely solved, you can directly solve it, the answer is trivial, and then you construct the solution bottom up. Okay. The other example was binary search. In binary search, you can also say something like this: at any particular point of time, if you have a portion of an array in which you want to search for a particular number, then what you do is you basically check at the midpoint of that particular part what is the current value. If the current value is greater than the value to be searched, you basically say, just recursively search for the left sub part of this array for this particular value. Otherwise, you say recursively search for this value in the right subpart, right? So at each step, you basically divide the problem. You reduce the size of the problem by roughly half, and this keeps on happening until either you have found the key, or the size of your array becomes 0, right? So there is no possibility that the element can be there. So this is the base case. So this is like a summary of how divide and conquer works. I think we have discussed it. Any questions? Okay. So then we actually returned back to functions because there was something that we had not discussed. This was the concept of call by value and call by reference. So usually when you call a function, that type of call is known as passed by value. So what you say is basically the local variables in the calling function. For instance, I mean usually they are the local variables. Whatever value you pass from the calling function is being sent to the called function, and in your formal parameters their values are copied. Okay, so basically it is just the value that travels from the calling function to the called function, something like this. I think there must be a, okay, so this is the space for function x. This is here a is equal to 10, and when you call g a comma 5, there is another variable a here, which is basically a different variable than this, and this 10 gets copied here, and this 5 gets copied into b. So this is the idea of passing by value. When you say passing by reference, what it means is that you can see that whenever whatever change you make to a and b in the called function, it doesn't affect the a in the calling function, because there are two different variables sitting at two different locations in the memory. So this is why, right, there is no possibility of a side effect. We call a side effect as a kind of effect on the variables within the calling function after the function call has returned. Okay, this is known as a side effect, that even though you did not change the value locally, the function that you called has somehow changed the value of the variables. We call it a side effect. So whenever you are passing values by passing parameters by value, there's no chance of a side effect. But when you try to, so another way to pass these values to the calling function, and sometimes we actually want the side effects to take place, is by passing the parameters by reference. So in reference, what you do is you basically pass the address of that particular variable, and the formal parameter that is there is a pointer variable. It is not a normal variable, but a pointer variable. And using that pointer variable, whatever changes you make, right? So I think there might be some example here. Yeah, so this is a pointer variable, and p is essentially pointing to a, the variable in the calling function. And now that you guys actually know how stacks work, you can understand why this is not a problem, because this function f and this function g, because f is calling g, the stack frame of g is going to sit on top of stack frame of f. So you are guaranteed that all the variables in function f are going to be there in the memory when you call g, right? So this ampersand, okay, this relationship works. It doesn't work the same way when you return a value by reference. So if you return a value from g back to f by reference through a pointer, then you have to be careful, because if that particular variable was allocated in g, as soon as g returns, that memory gets freed. Okay. So this is the example. I think we have discussed it in the class also. The imperfect swapping, where basically you're trying to swap the values by just passing them by value, which is not possible. Whatever happens in the called function remains in the called function. It doesn't affect the variables in the calling function. So if you want to make this swap work, you have to pass your values by reference, and this is where you use two pointer variables. Now whatever changes you make will be visible here. Yeah, returning point, I think I have discussed. Yeah, so one of the things, like, as I said, right, sometimes you might actually want to return a value by reference as well. In such cases, the best values to return by reference are those are the pointers that have been allocated by malloc. Why? Because this is allocated from a different part of your memory space, and this memory doesn't get freed when the function returns. And another point is the arrays are always passed by reference. Why? Because arrays essentially are pointers. Okay, they are pointer constants. So whenever you pass an array, you are essentially in the hidden form passing a pointer. I think some additional points. Yeah. Yeah, I think we have done. Any questions?
Sir, binary search is a subset of conquer and divide and conquer. Can we say that?
See, binary search is an example of divide and conquer. You can call it an example of a concept. Divide and conquer is more of a paradigm. It tells you how should you solve problems. Binary search is an example where you apply that paradigm and you use it to solve your problem.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so it's similar to saying uh, second law of motion. Okay, that is a very generic law, right? But the same law of motion can be applied when you are dropping from the sky. It's just that the acceleration becomes g. Okay, that is a specific example. uh, okay, so that is the same thing. That divide and conquer is just the concept, the paradigm, and binary search is a peculiar example for it. Any other queries, guys?
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, when we return something to reference, you said we have to use malloc.
Yeah, I mean it makes sense because it could be malloc, or you can also return, let us say, a global variable. But the
So,
idea is,
so do we?
yeah,
So do we have to use? We have to free the like memory after using malloc.
yes. So you have to be careful that it often happens that you free the variable in some other function and you allocate it in some other function. But you have to be careful that you have to free the variable ultimately. Any other queries? Okay. So then we moved to structures. Okay, so we have seen how arrays can be used as collections of variables of the same type. In certain cases, you might actually want to create a collection of different types of variables, and this basically is this particular facility is provided to you by structures. So a typical structure can contain different types of data types. You can have, let us say, x integers or y floats and z characters, so on and so forth. You can have um, characters. You can have structure variables as well within a particular structure, so you can call it some kind of nesting. Okay, the idea is that you first have to declare a template. In that template, you say that in this particular structure variable, these are the types of data types that are going to be there. These are the type of variables. I call these types of variables as member variables. So in this particular example, I, F, and C are types integer, float, and char respectively. And these I, F, and C are known as the member variable of a structure of a structure of type of name sample underscore structure. So this is a template. You define the template that all the structure variables which I am going to create are going to have these three member variables I, F, and C. And then when you want to create a structure variable, you just create it like a typical integer character float. You just put the keyword struct, the name of the template, and then the name of the structure variable, something like this. If you want to access a particular member variable within the structure, you use the dot operator. Okay, so basically if you want to use the I variable of s1 structure variable, you do s1 dot I, s1 dot f, s1 dot c, something like this. Uh, so all these member variables, they still hold on to their individual properties. So that means that if I is an integer, whatever you can do with an integer, you can do with s1 dot I. Whatever you can do with a float, you can do with s1 dot float, s1 dot f, right? So they actually hold on to their individual properties, all the member variables. This, I think, we have discussed so many times the car example, that there is a car whose name, so this is actually an array, by the way. It is a character array. You can also have arrays as member variables, and you have a capacity and a price in lakhs. So there are three member variables of the structure. There is a typedef keyword which people often use when they are using structures. The reason being that whenever you want to create a structure variable, you have to use the struct keyword. Struct space the name of the structure and then the name of the variable. So in order to shorten the amount of effort, people often use the typedef keyword. Although typedef is not just applicable to structures, it is a generic thing that you can use at any particular point. The idea of typedef is that you use it something like this, typedef, and then whatever you write here, okay. Basically, let us say after typedef you have n tokens, okay. Then the last token becomes the alias for the rest of the n minus 1 tokens. So now wherever in the program you were writing struct space sample underscore structure, it can be changed with new underscore type. So now, you can now create a variable of type sample underscore structure by simply writing new underscore type s3. So here what I'm doing is I'm just calling that struct passenger vehicle. From here onwards, we can just use the alias car. And so similar to a typical variable, you can actually assign one structure variable to another structure variable like this. S2 is equal to S1. What really happens is that in the background, there is a member to member copy. So let us say S1.I gets copied to S2.I, S1.F gets copied to S2.F, so on and so forth. And you can also have pointer to structure variables. Variable instead of a particular member variable. And you can also use this pointer to actually access a particular member variable, something like this, asterisk ptr.i. Now you have to use the parenthesis here because of precedence issues. If you don't put uh, this particular parenthesis, I think it would be there somewhere. I guess it is in the second part. So the another equivalent expression to writing this is ptr arrow I, right? So hyphen and greater than sign. We'll have a look at it later. Okay. So this is just an example. So you can pass your structure variables to functions, by the way, like this. This is an example of a structure array. This is structure variables being passed by reference, and this is structure variables being passed by value. Any questions? Okay. So then we actually moved to data structures. There were 3 data structures that we discussed in total: stack, queue, and linked list. So stacks are very useful because this is how we actually implement function calls in most of the languages. The concept of so this is a typical scenario of how function calls are implemented. I think we have gone through this, but I'll just go through it in brief. So essentially, in the beginning, you start with with some memory within your main memory for just the main function, and then the local variables for main are allocated here. As soon as you have a function call, some more memory is allocated. Okay, this is known as another stack frame. Now within the lecture of Avanish, I think Avanish told us that it is possible that the stack either grows up or grows down, so it is dependent on the platform. So it is easiest to assume that it is growing up like this. So basically another stack frame comes on top of this main frame, and after its execution is done, um, let us say it calls another function like this. You add another frame over it. So there are 3 frames currently in my memory, and my current execution state is currently at line number 16. Then as my functions start returning, okay, these frames go out of memory. They are deallocated like this. Okay, I think this part is clear. So the concept of a stack is something like this. A stack is actually a last in first out data structure. Whatever data you push to a stack first it actually comes out in the end. This is the idea. A typical example is from a real world example. Assume that you have a tumbler and you are going to put some values, some biscuits or whatever it is, one after the other. So, and then when you want to take out a biscuit, the top most biscuit comes out first, and the bottommost biscuit comes out at the end. So this is the concept of a stack. There are two operations called push and pop. A push operation actually pushes a value or adds a value, inserts a value in a stack, and this value goes and sits on top of the other presently occupying values, and a pop operation takes out the value that is there on the top of the stack. So this is a typical example. In the beginning, my top is at this position here, and I just have one element, which is 12. Then if I push something more, my top comes here, and the topmost value is 21. If I do another push, my top is here, and this value is 39. If I do a pop, the topmost value, that is 39, that gets deleted from my stack, and my top is now pointing here. And if I do another pop, my top comes back to this place. Another data structure which is usually considered a counterpart of stack is queue. In stack, stack is basically a one-ended data structure. The insertions and deletions take place from the single end, and this is why the value that was added towards the end is the value that gets ousted first, right? In queue, it is not the same. In queue, you basically have two ends open, but you are only allowed to insert values from one end and then take them out from the other. So essentially there are two ends. There is a rear end and there is a front end. From the rear end, new values can enter the queue, and from the front end, these values can go out. It is similar to how a queue works, right? In a typical scenario, people who are new join the queue at the back, and then they actually leave the queue from the front as they get served, for example. The counterparts of push and pop when we are talking about queue are NQ and DQ respectively. So this is an example of CPU scheduling. I don't think we need to discuss it. This is the basic idea of queue. Uh, you basically have a front and rear in the beginning right here. When you add a new value, when you NQ a new value, the rear part goes here and the front is still here. You add another value, the rear part goes here, the front is still here. When you DQ a value, the front moves ahead and this value is thrown out of the queue. Another DQ operation, and the front and rear are both here now, and another NQ will now take rear ahead. So now you can see that there is one basic problem with queue, that at some point of time both rear and front will actually reach the end of the array, and then you need to have some kind of a mechanism to deal with it. So this is why usually we actually make a queue as a circular queue. So these pointers can, let us say if my pointers come here, they can then move back to the beginning. So this is the overall idea. We are not going to discuss what a circular queue is, but this is the overall idea. Any questions?
So in the practice exam, you had given a question about stack and queue.
Mhm.
So in that you had written first 25, then 42,
Mhm.
then 61, suppose. So how we will consider it means we will consider that first you had given the input as 21, then
Mhm.
42, then 61.
Mhm. Yeah. So basically, when you are talking about stack, if you say input 21, input let's take 1 2 3, that is easier. So you say input 1, input 2, input 3. So it means push 1, push 2, and push 3. So now because it is a stack, at any point of time it is only the topmost value that is accessible. So essentially 1 is sitting at the bottom, 2 is sitting in the middle, and 3 is sitting at the top. When you pop this, right, so basically output was equivalent to pop. So when you pop it, 3 comes out first, then comes out 2, and then in the end comes out 1. So basically, even though the input was made in the order 1 2 and 3, the output will be in the order 3, 2, and 1. But when you are using a queue, because in queue the input, the pushing and the popping, or let us say the insertion and deletion, they actually happen at different ends. If you input it, let us say 1, 2, and 3, at the output, at the time of output, the output will also be 1, 2, and 3. Okay, because so the order is different. It is the only thing that was there in that question, that what will be the order if the input was given in order x y z, with stack the output will come out in z y x, whereas for q.
Sir, actually, I was not getting whether which input is given first and which is given last. Because if we consider it like a box, means which you had explained.
Mhm,
So, if you had given input as first line 1, then second
mhm,
line 2, and then third line 3.
mhm.
So, it looks like third is given first, then second is given, then first is given. But if we see it like as a code, so first is given first, then second, then third.
So this was the question, that it is a weird programming language. What I had given you was essentially a piece of code, right? And it is written not in C but some other language, right? And when I
Okay,
say
sir.
input 1, input 2, input 3, it means that this is how a program works, right?
Okay, sir.
Right? This is how you write program. When you write a program, your program is evaluated from top to bottom like this. The first statement gets executed, then the second, then the third, and so on. So that was the same thing, that it was a program written in a weird programming language. Any other queries, guys? Okay. So then in the second part of structures, I think this was what I think was left. It was basically about self-referential structures, if I'm not wrong. Um, Yes, this was about the two things, right? First of all, it was the pointer to member operator or the arrow operator. So we said that if you want to write something like this, if you want to access a particular member variable with the help of a pointer, you should put the pointer variable first in the parenthesis, because otherwise it will be evaluated as ptr.I and then asterisk. So which is not right. So you have to put it like this. Another alternative to doing this is simply writing it like this: ptr arrow I. Okay, so this arrow operator is the pointer to member operator, which allows you to point to a particular member variable of that particular structure. There is another concept called the self-referential structures. In self-referential structures, what happens? You actually keep a pointer to the same type of structure that you are trying to define. Okay, we will use these self-referential structures when we have a look at linked list. But the idea, usually we do this because we want to create a chain, that there are multiple structure variables and we want to basically chain them together. So in that case, the easiest way to do that is by having a pointer, which is a member variable of the same structure. So these are called as self-referential structures. The simple example of self-referential structures are linked list. This is the example. I think we have discussed it at length in the class, but the idea is something like this. In linked list, we usually have a section where data is stored. So here I am storing integer data 50, 35, 45, 65. And then I have these pointers which can point to another structure variable of the same type. So if I store the address of this particular structure variable here, and then this structure variable here, and then in the last structure variable, I store the null pointer, it basically creates a chain. So if I have a pointer here at the first node, I use the term that we usually call this, that we usually use, is node. So if we have a pointer pointing to the first node, and let us starting from head, I can actually follow these pointers to go up to the end of this list, and this list is known as linked list. So this is a typical example. In linked list, whenever you're trying to add a value, there are two ways to do this. You can either add a value at the head, which means that it basically comes up in the front. Something like this. Here I'm just doing insert at head. So this is a new because currently my list was my list was basically empty. So then head is actually null. I created a new node and then I assigned head to it. Then if I want to insert new values here, I just add something like this, like basically 35 is here, and then I just point to the next part. And then if I want to insert another value in this linked list, usually what I do is I provide you the node after which I want that particular value to be inserted. So in this case, I am saying that please insert 65 after the node 35. So the idea is I start from head, I keep on going through this list unless I find the node with 35, and then I insert it like this. In fact, yeah, here it is much better. So essentially, what I have to do is I have to break this particular link. I have to put a new node here. Then this node points to the new node, and the new node's next points to this node. And then when you want to delete a particular node, it is just about manipulating pointers. You take the next, which let us say if I want to delete 35, whatever was there in the next part of my 35 node, I just copy it to the previous node, and then I have this link. So this link actually is broken, and now this node directly points to this node. So this is a simple example of insertion and deletion in a linked list. Any questions on this? No questions? Okay. So the next part, so this was basically the last part of our regular coding part, right? So this was about file handling. So now whenever you want to do file handling, there is a basic concept that you need to know, that files are of two types: text files and binary files. Uh, Text files are basically the files that you can simply open up in Notepad or Vim or that kind of thing, and they are essentially they store the data character by character. Each each byte within a typical text file essentially represents a particular character. This is when we are using an encoding like ASCII. In ASCII, you take so you represent each character by just 1 byte. So in a typical text file, each byte, so if you have, let us say, 5 bytes, they essentially mean that there are 5 characters there. In binary files, it is up to you, right? So you decide what data is there in a binary file, and how exactly is this particular data being is to be interpreted. So this is why binary files are there are different types of binary files, and as a program which wants to read or write these binary files, you must be aware of the actual format, the way in which data has been written and the way it must be read. So you must know the format of your binary file. The examples of binary files are basically all the files that you use instead, other than those simple txt files. Word files, images, music, video, they are all binary files. The only thing that you have to do to realize is that even though they are both just a collection of bytes, the interpretation is different. For a text file, each byte is essentially representing a character, and in binary files, you have your own format. You define what is the interpretation of each individual byte or a collection of bytes. So this is, I think, a differentiating example. I think I just wrote some zero, right, in within a particular the text file and an ASCII file. So this is how it is stored when I'm trying to store it like a like an integer. Whereas when I try to store it like, sorry, this is when I'm trying to store it like an integer. This is basically 4 bytes of data, 0 0 0 0 0 0. This is 0 as an integer, and here when I'm trying to store 0 as a character, this is essentially 48, right? 48 is the ASCII code of my of 0, the digit. Okay. So there are four functions that you need to know. Reading text files, writing text files, reading binary files, and writing binary files. These are the four types of functions you should know in order to do any kind of file handling in any language, not just C. Okay. In C, the starting point is to create a file pointer, file pointer, and this pointer is the one that is going to be passed on to all these functions which are going to read, write stuff, right? So you begin by using the fopen function. Within fopen function, you have to provide an access mode. This access mode, there are I asked you guys to check up the man function of fopen. There are multiple access modes. The simplest ones are R and W. R stands for read, W stands for write. Um, if you want to do it in a binary mode, that is basically the file is a binary file. You also suffix B to R and W, and from there onwards, and by the way, in the end you use the fclose function, which simply closes the connection to this particular file. If you want to write characters to the file, the functions are fprintf and fputs. You know how to use both of them. Fprintf is just exactly like printf. The only difference being you also need the file pointer to be provided to this, and fputs I think you guys have already used. um, you want to read the functions, the common functions are fscanf and fgetis. Fgetis I think we have used multiple times. Fscanf is just the counterpart of scanf, and again it takes just one more argument, and that is the same file pointer. If you want to read and write stuff in binary files, the first thing that you have to come up with is a format. So you have to decide what byte within my binary file means what. So essentially, let us say a typical format is I will write an integer followed by a double followed by a character. So this is a kind of a format. You have to choose this format, based on your program. Even the same number of bytes can actually be interpreted in different fashions. So this is a typical example that let us say I'm writing 13 bytes of data in a file. I can interpret the first 4 as integer, next 8 as double, and the last one as a character, or I can interpret the first as character, then the double, and then the integer. So it is the same 13 bytes, but even so, it's the program which created this binary file, that program knows how it was written. So the program which reads this binary file should also be aware of this format. So once you know this, then there are some functions, fwrite and fread functions. You can use them to write whatever data you want to write. The typical example of fwrite is here. So basically it asks you for the data that you want to write, the size of each element, and then the number of elements. So this is the idea. You can use this kind of uh, syntax in order to write arrays. So if you have a full array that you want to write in just one go, instead of one, you can basically give the size of the array. This is the idea, and it also takes the file pointer as an argument. Similarly, there is
So,
go ahead.
so why we use the AND operator before after
Yeah,
before
so
number
we
of
had
elements?
this discussion previously as well. Frankly, I really don't know why they are asking for the AND operator. Maybe the reason is that sometimes the amount of data that you may actually write using fwrite is huge. Okay, it could be thousands of bytes. If you do not use ampersand, it will be passed by value, so everything has to be copied from one place to another place. Typically, it is much easier to simply pass the address of your data, and fwrite simply takes up data directly from that location and writes it to the file. So this is a part of the functions prototype. You have to use it like this only.
Okay, sir.
Right, so I mean, this is my personal guess that by using ampersand they are actually avoiding the copying part, because otherwise if you are, let us say, trying to write 1000 bytes in a go, those 1000 bytes must first be passed by value to fwrite. So you have to copy everything from point 1 to point B, and this will take some time. It is much easier to simply go at that location and read the data. Any other queries, guys? Okay. So the counterpart for fwrite is basically fread. Okay, it is I mean, I think the syntax is almost identical. The value here actually it makes sense to give the address of the place where you want data to be written. Okay, so basically what fread will do is it will go and read some number of bytes from the file, and it will copy it into a variable. So here the variable is actually number of elements. You are saying that please read size of int multiplied by 1, these many number of bytes from the file, and copy it to this variable. So this is the, again, here also you can simply read a complete array in one iteration. Any questions?
So what type of questions will be asked from file handling in exam? Means
That
will it
is
based on code or theory type?
um it has to be both, I guess, right? I mean, I really don't know. I have not yet started designing the endsem paper, but you should expect some simple code fragments, not too different, no, not too difficult, but simple code fragments, and then I mean, there will be conceptual questions from all the things that we have studied. So
And sir, about a linked list.
linked list, I am not going to ask in the exam. Okay, so don't worry about linked list. Stacks and queues, yes, there may be questions, but linked list there won't be a question. There might be question like, so there won't be a code question. So I'm not going to ask you self-referential structures, how to use self-referential structures. That I'm not going to ask you. But yeah, conceptually you should know what is a linked list.
And so similar for structures also.
No, structures you can get a code question. Okay, structures you should know. Linked list I will not. So for instance, I'm not going to give you a typical code of linked list to read and understand, because that will take up a lot of time. You have to basically draw boxes and then figure out how the linked list is being made. So those type of questions I'm not going to give, but you should still know what a linked list is.
Okay, so
Any other queries? We have to wrap it up fast. I think we have hit 7:15. Okay, so if there are no queries, I'll just move forward. The only thing that is left now is basically accessing a particular byte within a file. We call this as random access within a file. So there are some functions which are useful for it. Usually you use ftell and fseek. I don't know if there is anything else, but yeah. So fseek is basically the function that you normally use. If you want to read a particular value within a file, let me give you a simple example. If you have written 10 integers within a file, you have written basically 40 bytes of data, and if you want to read the fifth integer, okay, you have to basically skip 4 integers within the file. So 4 integers means 16 bytes of data. So if you basically say, hey fc, please take me to byte offset 16, and then you use your fread function and read an integer, the integer that you will read will be the fifth integer in the file. So this is the overall concept of fseek. Ftell can tell you that where is the current position of your file, right? So where is the access position right now? Ftell will just tell you where it is, and fseek can take you to that position. That is the overall idea. So this is the concept of fseek. This is I think we have discussed it in the class as well. Anything else is there in this? Structures, yeah. Just similar to any any common variable, integer, char, float, double, you can also read and write structures directly to a file. It's just that whenever you write or read a structure, the whole structure, all the member variables within that particular structure are read or written, and it is a best practice not to read individual member variables or not to write individual member variables, but read and write structure variables as a whole. This is a good practice. Yes, this is I like that. Basically, this particular structure has what, 4, 5, so 7, right? So 7 bytes of data. So when you write a particular structure variable using fwrite, it basically writes 7 bytes. If you write another one, it writes 7 more bytes like this. Reading the catalog chart. Yeah, any questions? All right. So yeah, go ahead. Somebody had a question.
Sir, bitwise operations and pre-processor directives are included in NSIM
Yes,
syllabus or
yes, they are included.
okay, sir. And sir, debugging?
No, debugging is not.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So this is the last part, right? Last week, week 11. Um, in the first part of this assorted topics, we talked about bitwise operators. You guys know what Boolean algebra is, and or not functions. And means one and one is one. Or means zero or zero is zero. Otherwise, it's one. And not is basically just the inversion. Zero's not is one, and one's not is zero. So they are these there are logical operators in C. Double ampersand and double pipe, right? Whatever you call it. These are essentially logical operations. You basically perform them over expressions, and the output is either a one or a zero based on the actual anding or oring. And similarly, the not. So if the output is zero, it becomes one. If it is one, it becomes zero. In bitwise operators, what we do is we do this same anding, oring, knotting, whatever it is, but at the bit level. So it happens bit by bit. So if I have, let us say, a 16-bit integer, whenever I do bitwise and, there are actually 16 and operations that take place. Okay, so each bit, corresponding bits between the two integers are anded together, and this is what is there in the result. So each bit, result of each bit is independent of the result of the other bits. And it is not recommended to use it with negative integers, because you might actually receive results which are hard to interpret. So usually people use it with unsigned integers. It is not allowed to use them over doubles and floats and other types of variables, but you can use it over char, int, short, long, basically any integer type variables it is allowed. And they are like this, like ampersand, single pipe, and this tilde is essentially bitwise not. And this caret sign is also known as the XOR operator. XOR is essentially like this. If the number of inputs are odd, right, if the number of ones are odd, XOR outputs the output of XOR is 1. If the number of ones is even, it actually gives you a 0. So basically 0 XOR 0 is also 0, and 1 XOR 1 is also 0. The only way it will produce 1 is if either of the two is 1, right? So 1 XOR 0 is 1, and 0 XOR 1 is 1. So this is the representation. I think it is like a bit too much. We have already seen this. So in this, basically, this is the anding happening here, right? 1 and 1 is 1, and then everything else is 0. And then if this was the representation for 6, this was the representation for 13. And when you do this anding, whatever comes out, you can interpret this as 4. And similarly for OR, you have to be a bit careful about not, because usually when you do this not thing, if the value over which you did this not was a very small value, I'm talking about unsigned cases. If the value was very small, it will become huge, and if it was huge, it might become very small. This is in the case of unsigned. If it is signed, then of course you have to do the 2's complement and figure out what it means. XOR, so one of the typical uses of bitwise operators is XOR. XOR is commonly used for many types of stuff. I'm not going to go into the detail. I think there might be something in the homework that you could have read. Um, yeah, so these are the shift operators. So in shift operators, what we do is we basically shift bit patterns either to left or to right. um, uh, Arithmetically, a shift to the right essentially means multiplication by 2, and a shift to left means a division by 2, something like this. So if you do one left shift for 6, it becomes 12. If you do two left shifts for 6, it becomes 24. And you can see that whenever you left shift something, something is added, a 0 is added to the right. Similarly, for a right shift, whenever you shift the bit patterns to the right, a 0 gets added to the left part of the bit pattern, and this is the equivalent of doing an integer division by 2. Okay. What is there in this? Any questions? Sorry, we are late, but like we have just one more lecture left. Okay. So this is the last part, the preprocessor part. So you guys have used this hash include in almost all your programs. So this hash include statement is not really something that is processed by the compiler. There is an element within your compilation suite called the preprocessor, and these hash include and some other statements are actually processed by the preprocessor. What this preprocessor actually does is that it actually replaces the code with some other code. So your compiler never actually sees hash include. It sees some other code which has been replaced by the preprocessor. So this is the overall idea of a preprocessor. There are two common preprocessor directives: hash include and hash define. They are used for almost similar things. They are basically a kind of dumb copy paste tools. Okay, so. So this is I don't think I won't cover this in the class in the revision, because this is not a part of your end semester. Okay, yeah, so this is not a part of your end semester. Splitting of files into uh, multiple files, splitting your code into multiple files, that is not going to be a part of your end semester exam. Okay, so the
So C processor will be there.
yeah, preprocessor will be there, so you should know what happens when you use hash include or hash define, but I'm not going to expect that so there will be no code which essentially involves understanding of linker, for example. So where you prepare object codes from different files and then you merge them together using a linker. Those parts are not there in the end semester syllabus. So that showroom example that is there, that is not in the end semester syllabus. So the hash include directive is basically very simple. Whatever you do, whatever you give as the after your hash include, the content of that particular file gets copy pasted at the place wherever the compiler finds, the preprocessor finds your hash include statement. Something like this: if you say hash include yellow.x in green.x, this is what will this is how your code will look like to the compiler. The hash define thing is exactly the same like hash include. It is also a dumb copy paste thing, but here instead of copying contents from the whole file, you are basically doing it for expressions or tokens. So you basically say whenever you find this particular token, please replace it in a dumb fashion with some other set of tokens, and you can use this to actually create what are known as macros. Macros are some kind of inline functions where a particular code gets replaced by something else. So this is a simple example. I'm defining a macro called square, where x is a parameter, and whenever I type square 5, basically it gets interpreted, it gets expanded into 5 into 5, right? This is like this, and your compiler will always see this. It will not see this or this. Okay. Now, one of the issues with the with this pre-processing is that it is actually too dumb like this. But the preprocessor also understands some conditional expressions. So you can basically say, please include this if a particular condition is true, or don't include this if this condition is true. If you want to use some conditional logic, then there are hash if and hash elif, hash if and hash elif directives that you can use. It is used something like this: you basically put a condition here which must evaluate to an integer, and then you do whatever you want to be done whenever this condition is true is added here, and then you do a hash endif. You can also have things like hash else, hash elif and hash else, similar to your if else ladder in your typical C programming, elif and else. Now, one of the common use, and if, by the way, if def means that if a particular token is already defined, then you call it if def. Otherwise, then this if def function, not function, if def directive will actually go through. This is, as I said, so hash if def is equivalent to saying hash if not defined or hash if defined. So this is the idea. So this is the reason we use it is to avoid the multiple inclusion problem. This is an example of multiple inclusion problem. Let us say you had that green.x which already had yellow.x content pasted into it. Now if you create another file called red.x and you include yellow.x accidentally again, the final output will look something like this, where the yellow part gets included twice. In order to avoid this, you type simple expressions like this: if and f underscore yellow. So underscore yellow is a token that has to be unique across your program. So it is the challenge is just to figure out what this token should be. As long as you understand, you come up with some scenario where this token is unique, and that is why usually these tokens start with underscore or double underscore. It's kind of a convention. You use this if and def thing, and you whatever you want to be included, you put it within this block, this if block. So now you will be guaranteed that the yellow.x code doesn't get included twice. The final output will be like this. No, so I don't think this is what we would like to use. Okay. Any queries, guys? Okay, so if you have no queries, so this is basically the end of your ITP. Okay, and this is the last lecture. We are done with our syllabus. We will, when is the end sem? 18th, right? I think. So let me stop the recording now.